sandstorm had swallowed the sky whole. One moment, Corporal Joran Vale was shouting orders into his cracked comms unit. The next, the world exploded in fire and noise. Shrapnel tore through his chest plate like paper. And the last thing he remembered was the taste of iron in his mouth and the choking weight of crimson sand pressing into his eyes. He thought it was over. He thought he was dead. But death, it seemed, had other plans, or perhaps a very strange sense of humor. Joran opened his eyes to a battlefield littered with wreckage. Smoldering hulls of dropships lay half-buried in dunes like fossilized beasts. The air still shimmered with heat and the acrid stench of ionized metal. His body ached as if it had been dragged through the heart of a dying star, every muscle protesting even the shallowest breath. He tried to move, and pain lanced through his ribs like a hot wire. That alone told him he wasn't dead. The dead didn't hurt this much. Then he saw her, kneeling beside him, her blue skin streaked with dust and blood, her long sapphire hair tangled and matted with sand, was Princess Lyria of the Velani Dominion. Her eyes, large, luminous, and the color of storm-touched twilight, were red-rimmed and wet. Tears traced clean lines down her cheeks, cutting through the grime like rivers through scorched earth. She was whispering something in her native tongue, her voice trembling like a plucked string on a broken lyre. She hadn't noticed he was awake. Joran blinked slowly, unsure whether this was a hallucination brought on by blood loss or some cruel trick of the desert heat. Lyria was royalty, haughty, unreadable, the very symbol of the alien empire his unit had been sent to repel. He'd seen her only once before, during the failed peace summit 2 cycles ago, standing tall beside her father, the Velani emperor, arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line of disdain. She'd looked at humans like they were insects beneath her sandals. And now here she was, weeping over his broken body like he was someone precious. "Princess?" he croaked, his voice raw. Lyria froze. Her head snapped toward him, eyes wide with shock, then disbelief, then something softer. Relief so profound it made her shoulders sag. "Joran?" she whispered, as if speaking too loud might shatter the moment. He managed a weak nod. "Last I checked, I wasn't supposed to be breathing." A choked laugh escaped her. "You were not. Your vitals flatlined 3 hours ago. The med scanners declared you gone." She wiped her face roughly with the back of her hand, smearing more dust than tear. "But I refused to leave you. The medics said I was wasting time. My generals called me reckless. But I knew you weren't gone." She reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from his forehead. Her fingers were cool, trembling slightly. "You always were too stubborn to die quietly." Joran tried to smile but winced instead. "That's a first. I've never been called stubborn by a princess before." Lyria's lips twitched into a small, genuine smile. "You've never been half dead on a desert battlefield with a Velani princess crying over you before, either. I'd say we're both experiencing many firsts. Despite the pain, despite the ruined battlefield and the distant echo of gunfire still ringing in the distance, Joran felt a strange warmth spread through his chest. It wasn't just relief at being alive. It was something else. Something he hadn't expected to feel toward an alien princess who had once looked at him like he was dirt. Their unlikely connection hadn't begun on this battlefield. It had started weeks earlier, during a ceasefire that no one believed would last. Joran, a grunt with too much heart and not enough sense, had been assigned to escort a Velani delegation through the human-controlled sectors of Dune 7, a barren rock of a planet caught in the crossfire of an interstellar war neither side fully understood. The Velani weren't monsters. They were proud, ancient, and deeply wounded by humanity's reckless expansion into their sacred territories. But Joran didn't care about politics. He cared about the fact that the youngest princess, Lyria, had stepped on a landmine during a patrol and he'd thrown himself in front of the blast without thinking. She'd survived. He'd woken up in a med bay with third-degree burns on his arms and a commendation he never asked for. Lyria had visited him every day, bringing strange fruits that tasted like sunshine and sorrow, speaking in halting standard he barely understood. Over time, her stiff formality had melted into something warmer, more curious. She asked him about Earth, about rain, about forests, about why humans built cities so far from the stars. He told her about his little sister who died of fever before he'd left for the war, about the bakery his mother ran back in New Jakarta, about how he missed the smell of fresh bread more than anything else in the galaxy. She listened, really listened, and in return, she told him about the Velani sky choirs, about their ancestral songs that could calm sandstorms, about how their blue skin darkened with emotion, How her father's skin turned near black with grief when her mother passed during the first wave of the war. They hadn't fallen in love. Not then, not exactly. But something deeper had taken root. Trust, understanding, a quiet bond that neither dared name. And now here they were, surrounded by the ruins of war, with Joran barely clinging to life and Lyria refusing to let go. "You shouldn't be here," Joran muttered, glancing past her at the smoldering remains of what used to be his unit's command post. "Your people will think you've betrayed them." "They already do," she said simply. "My brother, Kalen, called me a traitor when I insisted on coming to the front lines. He said I'd been poisoned by human sentiment." She looked down at her hands. "Maybe I have. But if caring for you is betrayal, then I choose it." Joran wanted to argue, to tell her to go back to the safety of her command skiff, to leave him to die in peace. But the truth was, he didn't want her to leave. Not now. Not ever. Before he could speak, the ground trembled. A low, guttural roar echoed across the dunes. Joran's blood ran cold. "Crawler," he whispered. Lyria's eyes snapped toward the horizon. Rising from the sands like an ancient god of ruin was a sandcrawler, a massive, multi-legged war machine used by the rogue faction known as the Ashenfang. Neither human nor Velani, the Ashenfang were scavengers, extremists who believed the only way to end the war was to erase both sides from the galaxy. And they'd just arrived to finish what the battle started. "We have to move," Joran said, trying to sit up. His vision swam, and black spots danced before his eyes. Lyria pressed a hand to his chest. "Lie still. You can barely breathe, let alone run." "I can fight," he growled, reaching for the pulse rifle lying half-buried nearby. "You'll collapse in 3 steps," she shot back. "And I won't watch you die twice in one day." He opened his mouth to argue, but she silenced him with a look, fierce, commanding, every inch the princess of a warrior race. Then she pulled a small device from her belt and pressed it to his sternum. A soft hum filled the air as nanites flooded his system, knitting bone, sealing wounds, dulling pain. It wasn't a full healing, more like a temporary patch, but it was enough to steady him. "Velani Field Stabilizer," she explained. "It'll keep you alive long enough for us to get to shelter." "Where's shelter in this wasteland?" he asked, scanning the endless dunes. "There's an old observatory," she said, helping him to his feet. "Abandoned during the first orbital strike. It's half-buried, but the lower levels should still be intact." Joran leaned heavily on her as they stumbled across the battlefield. Every step sent fresh waves of agony through his body, but he gritted his teeth and kept moving. Around them, the desert stretched in every direction, silent and indifferent. The crawler's footsteps grew louder, shaking the earth like a drumbeat of doom. "You know," Joran said between breaths, "if we die in that observatory, I'm blaming you." Lyria snorted. "If we die, I'll be sure to haunt you in the afterlife, just so I can keep reminding you how stubborn you are." He chuckled, then winced. "You're learning human sarcasm. That's terrifying." They reached the observatory just as the crawler crested the nearest dune. It was a crumbling dome of corroded alloy, half swallowed by the sands. Lyria activated a hidden panel, and a hatch hissed open, revealing a dark staircase spiraling downward. They descended quickly, Joran's legs shaking with every step. Inside, the air was cool and stale. Flickering emergency lights cast long shadows across abandoned consoles and shattered glass. The place smelled of ozone and old dust. "We'll be safe here for a while," Lyria said, helping him onto a metal bench. "The crawler's sensors can't penetrate this deep." Joran slumped back, breathing hard. "Safe is a strong word. We're 2 wounded soldiers hiding in a tomb." "2 wounded soldiers who just survived the impossible," she corrected gently. "That counts for something." He looked at her then, really looked. Her blue hair was a mess, her uniform torn at the shoulder, her face smudged with soot and tear tracks. But her eyes still burned with that unshakable light he remembered from their first talks in the medbay. She wasn't just royalty. She was Lyria, fierce, kind, stubborn in her own right. "Why did you stay?" he asked quietly. "When everyone else left me for dead. Why didn't you?" She hesitated, then sat beside him, her shoulder brushing his. "Because when the medic said you were gone, I felt like a part of me had died too." She looked away, her blue skin deepening to a soft indigo, a Velani sign of vulnerability. "I didn't understand it at first, but then I remembered your stories, about your sister, about the bakery." About how you kept a photo of your mother in your helmet. You were more than a soldier to me, Joran. You were real. He reached for her hand. And you were more than a princess to me. You were the first person in this war who made me feel like I mattered. Outside, the crawler let out another roar, shaking dust from the ceiling. But down here, in this forgotten tomb beneath the sands, time seemed to slow. The war, the empires, the endless cycle of bloodshed. It all faded into the background. There was only this, two wounded souls from different worlds, clinging to each other in the dark. Lyria turned to him, her expression serious. There's something I haven't told you. Joran braced himself. Oh no, is this the part where you tell me you're secretly engaged to a warlord or something? She laughed, a bright, surprised sound that filled the chamber. No, nothing like that. She took a deep breath. My father, the emperor, he's dying. The war has drained him, poisoned him. The royal physicians say he won't last another cycle. Joran frowned. I'm sorry, but that's not all, she continued. Before he got sick, he made a decree, a secret one. He named me his successor, but only if I could prove that peace with humanity was possible. That's why I came to the front lines. That's why I reached out to you. My father believes you're the key. The key? Joran scoffed. I'm just a corporal. I don't even like politics. You're more than that, she insisted. You listened when no one else would. You saved me when you had no reason to. You showed me that humans aren't just conquerors, you're capable of compassion. And if I can show my people that, maybe we can end this war before it consumes us all. Joran stared at her, stunned. You're betting the future of your empire on me? I'm betting it on us, she corrected softly. The weight of her words settled over him like a second skin. He wanted to protest, to tell her she was being naive. But then he remembered the way she'd cried over his lifeless body. The way she'd risked everything to stay with him. Maybe she wasn't naive. Maybe she was just brave enough to hope. A loud crash echoed from above. The crawler had found them. We can't stay here, Lyria said, standing quickly. There's an old transit tunnel that leads to the eastern ridge. If we can reach it, we might be able to signal a rescue skiff. Joran pushed himself up, the stabilizer still humming in his veins. Lead the way, Your Highness. She rolled her eyes. Stop calling me that. Only if you stop being so dramatic. She grinned, actually grinned, and pulled him toward a rusted door at the back of the chamber. Together, they moved through the narrow tunnels, the air growing colder with every step. The sounds of the crawler faded behind them, replaced by the soft whisper of wind through ancient vents. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time blurred in the dark. But eventually, they emerged onto a rocky outcrop overlooking a vast canyon. Below, the sands glowed faintly under the twin moons of Dune 7. And in the distance, hovering just above the horizon, was a Velani rescue skiff, its hull shimmering with protective shields. Hope flared in Joran's chest. But before they could signal it, a shadow fell over them. From the ridge above, figures emerged. Ashen Fong mercenaries, their armor scorched and jagged, their faces hidden behind respirators. Well, a voice growled in broken standard. The princess and her pet human. Lyria stepped in front of Joran, her posture rigid, her skin darkening to deep cobalt. Anger, defiance. You don't belong here, she said in flawless Velani, her voice ringing with authority. This world is under Dominion protection. The leader laughed. Your empire is crumbling, little princess. And soon, so will you. Joran gripped his pulse rifle tighter. His body screamed in protest, but he forced himself to stand tall beside her. Back off, he said, his voice rough but steady. Or you'll find out why they call me the Sand Ghost. The mercenaries exchanged glances, then laughed again. But they didn't laugh for long. From the canyon below, a chorus of voices rose, soft at first, then swelling into a powerful, haunting melody. The Velani Sky Choir, Lyria's personal guard, hidden in the rocks, had followed her signal. The Ashen Fong froze. Even through their masks, fear flickered in their eyes. The Velani songs weren't just beautiful. They carried sonic frequencies that could shatter bone and melt steel. Run, Lyria whispered to Joran. He didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted toward the edge of the outcrop as the song reached its crescendo. The mercenaries screamed as their armor cracked and their weapons exploded in their hands. The rescue skiff swooped low, its ramp lowering with a hiss. Strong hands pulled them aboard just as the ridge collapsed behind them in a cloud of dust and fire. Inside the skiff, safe at last, Joran collapsed onto the floor, gasping for air. Lyria knelt beside him, her hands flying over his chest, checking his vitals. "You're impossible," she muttered, but there was relief in her voice. "You're not so easy to get rid of either," he said with a weak smile. The skiff ascended, leaving the battlefield, and the ashes of war far below. In the days that followed, Joran recovered in the heart of the Velani fleet, surrounded by healers and silent guards who watched him with wary curiosity. Lyria never left his side. She argued with physicians, smuggled him earth rations, and even taught him a few Velani songs. Though his attempts were so terrible, she threatened to ban him from ever singing again. The Emperor, frail but alert, requested to see him. Joran expected judgment, suspicion, maybe even a death sentence. Instead, the old alien king simply studied him with tired eyes and said, "My daughter says you have a good heart. In times like these, that is rarer than victory." Joran didn't know what to say to that, so he just bowed his head and thanked him. Weeks turned into months. The war didn't end overnight, but something had shifted. News of the princess and the human soldier who defied death together spread through both armies. Ceasefires became longer. Prisoners were exchanged. Talks resumed, not just between generals, but between ordinary soldiers who began to see each other not as enemies, but as people. Joran never returned to active duty. Instead, he became something new, a bridge, a translator of cultures, a voice for peace. And Lyria, she became empress, though she insisted on ruling not from a throne, but from the front lines, always with Joran at her side. Years later, when the twin sons of Dune 7 set over a rebuilt observatory, now a school for human and Velani children, Joran would sit on the rooftop with Lyria, their blue and tan children playing in the sand below. She would rest her head on his shoulder, her hair shimmering under the stars, and whisper, "You still owe me a story about Earth Rain," and he would smile, wrap his arms around her, and say, "Only if you promise to stop crying over me like I'm dead." She'd laugh, the same bright laugh that had first echoed in that ruined battlefield, and reply, "Only if you promise to keep coming back to life." And in that moment, surrounded by peace they'd fought so hard to win, Joran knew he'd never truly been dead. He'd just been waiting to be found. Peace, Joran soon learned, was not a destination but a fragile thing. Like desert glass, beautiful but easily shattered. For 3 years, the fragile truce between the Velani Dominion and the Terran coalition held. Trade routes reopened. Cultural exchanges blossomed. Children, some with blue skin and human eyes, others with tan skin and Velani grace, played together in shared courtyards on neutral worlds. Joran and Lyria, now Empress and her sworn consort, worked tirelessly from the newly renamed Accord Citadel on Viridia, a moon once scarred by orbital bombardments, now blossoming with gardens and libraries. They had 3 children, 2 daughters and a son, each a living testament to the union of their peoples. The eldest, Selah, had Lyria's storm-touched eyes and Joran's stubborn jaw. The twins, Rian and Tael, were mirror opposites. One quiet and analytical like their mother, the other loud and impulsive like their father. Their laughter filled the palace halls, drowning out the echoes of war. But the universe, ever restless, would not let them rest. It began with whispers. Velani scouts vanished near the outer rim. Human freighters went dark in sectors long considered safe. At first, the disappearances were dismissed as rogue pirates or mechanical failures. Then came the transmissions, distorted, desperate, bearing a symbol no one recognized. A black spiral over a shattered star. Lyria's advisors urged caution. "It could be a ploy," said General Vorin, her most trusted warlord. "Someone trying to reignite old hatreds." But Joran knew better. He'd seen that symbol before, not in official records, but in the encrypted logs of a captured Ashen Fong warlord years ago. It was the mark of the Kethvor, a mythic faction long thought extinct. A splinter of the original Velani priesthood that had once preached purity through annihilation. They believed both humans and the tainted modern Velani were abominations that needed to be cleansed from the galaxy. "They're not myth," Joran told Lyria one night as they stood on the palace balcony, watching their children chase fireflies bioluminescent from Velani genetic artistry. "They've been hiding in the dead zones, breeding, building, and now they're coming back." Lyria's skin darkened to a deep, troubled violet. "If they reveal themselves openly, it will undo everything we've built. The Terran Council will demand military action. My own bloodline, my cousins in the Iron Clans, We'll use this as proof that peace with humans is weakness. We can't let fear dictate our choices, Joran said. Not again. So they acted in secret. Using old contacts from his military days and Lyria's network of sky singers, Velani spies who communicated through subharmonic song, they tracked the Kethvor to a derelict orbital station orbiting the dead planet of Xylos Prime. It was there they discovered the truth. The Kethvor weren't just attacking ships, they were harvesting genetic material. Human and Velani DNA, spliced together in grotesque experiments to create a pure hybrid warrior. And at the heart of it all was a name that chilled Joran to his core. Dr. Elias Vorn. Joran hadn't heard that name in decades. Vorn had been his commanding officer during the early days of the war, a brilliant but ruthless geneticist who'd vanished after a failed bioweapon project nearly wiped out an entire colony. Officially, he was presumed dead. Unofficially, Joran had always suspected he'd defected. Now, Vorn was leading the Kethvor, calling himself the architect of the new dawn. And worse, his latest prototype, a silent, deadly assassin codenamed Echo, bore an uncanny resemblance to Joran himself. Same height, same build, even the same scar above the left eyebrow, except Echo's eyes were empty, hollow, and his skin shimmered with unstable bioluminescent grafts. They're using your genome as the base, Lyria whispered after reviewing the intel. You're the template for their perfect soldier. Joran felt sick. Then I'm the only one who can stop him. Against Lyria's protests, he went undercover, infiltrating the station disguised as a captured mercenary. The inside was a nightmare of pulsing organic corridors and suspended cloning vats. In the central chamber, Vorn stood before a massive hologram of the Accord Citadel, plotting its destruction. You always were a sentimental fool, Vale, Vorn sneered when Joran revealed himself. You think love can hold back the tide of evolution? The galaxy doesn't reward compassion. It rewards power. And I will give the Kethvor the power to rule it. Before Joran could react, Echo emerged from the shadows. Silent, swift, lethal. Their fight was brutal. Echo moved like Joran, fought like Joran, even anticipated his moves. But he lacked one thing, soul. In a desperate move, Joran used an old trick from basic training, tapping the neural disruptor behind his ear, a relic from his war days. The pulse short-circuited Echo's implants, causing the clone to convulse and collapse. Joran barely escaped as the station self-destructed, Vorn's final laugh echoing in his ears. You saved your family once, Vale, but can you save them from what's already inside? Back on Viridia, Lyria embraced him like he'd been gone a lifetime. But Joran couldn't shake Vorn's words. That night, as he held his sleeping daughter Sayla, he noticed something strange. Her left palm bore a faint, spiral-shaped birthmark, the same symbol as the Kethvor. His blood ran cold. He checked the twins. Tail had the mark on his shoulder. Rian on her ankle. They'd been marked from birth. Not by fate, but by design. Joran confronted Lyria in the royal observatory, voice trembling. Did you know? She turned, her eyes wide with confusion. Then dawning horror as she saw the children's marks in the data pad he held. No, she whispered. I swear, Joran, I didn't. But then she hesitated. Her skin flickered indigo, then gray. What aren't you telling me? He asked, heart pounding. Lyria took a deep breath. Before we were married, before the truce, my father made a pact with the Shadow Council. They feared the war would exterminate our bloodline. So they preserved embryos, pure Velani genetic lines frozen in stasis. But after I met you, after I believed in peace, I asked them to merge human and Velani DNA. Not for war, for unity, for a new kind of future. You authorized genetic blending? Joran asked, stunned. I did, she admitted. But I never gave them your DNA. I used anonymous donors, willing volunteers from both species. I hoped it would create children who could bridge our worlds without carrying the weight of our past. Then how do our children have Vorn's mark? Joran pressed. Lyria's face paled. Unless someone intercepted the program. Unless Vorn stole the genetic archive during the final siege of Xylos. The truth crashed over them like a sandstorm. Their children weren't just symbols of peace. They were unknowing inheritors of a genetic time bomb. And Vorn, from beyond the grave, for he had perished in the station's explosion, had ensured that his legacy would live on through them. Worse still, the Kethvor hadn't been destroyed. They'd scattered, embedding sleeper agents across both empires. And now they began to activate. First, a Velani ambassador was assassinated on Earth. stabbed with a blade coated in a toxin that mimicked human biosignatures. Then, a Terran diplomat was poisoned on Viridia using a Velani nerve agent. Old wounds reopened. Accusations flew. The fragile alliance trembled on the edge of collapse. Joran and Lyria knew they had to act fast. But they couldn't reveal the truth about their children. It would make them targets or worse, weapons to be studied. So they crafted a gamble. They announced a grand unity festival on Dune 7, the site of their first meeting, now rebuilt as a monument to peace. They invited leaders from every system, human and alien alike. And in secret, they summoned the Sky Choir not to sing battle hymns, but to broadcast a harmonic frequency capable of deactivating the Keth-4 neural triggers hidden in sleeper agents. But the Keth-4 anticipated the move. On the eve of the festival, as sandstorms swirled around the desert monument, an assassin struck. Not at Joran or Lyria, but at their children. Sayla was kidnapped during a ceremonial dance, taken by a cloaked figure who moved like smoke. Joran didn't hesitate. He tracked the kidnapper to the ruins of the old battlefield observatory, the very place where Lyria had wept over his lifeless body years before. Inside, Sayla stood unharmed but terrified, facing a hologram of Vorn's final message. "Your daughter carries the key," the recording said. "Not to destruction but to evolution. Activate the gene sequence, and she will awaken the true potential of the hybrid line. Refuse, and the sleeper agents will ignite war beyond your imagining." Sayla looked at her father, tears in her eyes. "I heard voices, Papa. In my head, they told me I was special, that I was chosen." Joran's heart broke. He knelt and pulled her close. "You are special," he whispered, "but not because of some madman's code. Because you're ours." He destroyed the hologram, then carried Sayla back to the festival grounds. Lyria met them with relief so fierce it brought tears to her eyes. But the crisis wasn't over. As the festival began, with thousands gathered beneath the twin moons, the sleeper agents activated. Not to kill, but to broadcast. Across every screen, every comm channel, Vorn's final message played. Footage of Joran and Lyria's children. Their birthmarks highlighted. Their DNA sequences displayed like blueprints for a new race. "Behold the heirs of the new dawn," Vorn's voice declared. "Not human, not Velani, but something greater." Panic erupted. Yet, in that moment of chaos, Lyria stepped onto the central dais. She didn't deny the truth. Instead, she embraced it. "Yes," she announced to the stunned crowd. "My children carry blended blood, but not because of Vorn, because we chose love over fear, because we believed that what unites us is stronger than what divides us." Joran joined her, taking her hand. "They tried to make our children weapons," he said, voice steady. "But we made them bridges. And you, every one of you, can choose what they become." Then Sayla, no longer afraid, walked forward. She raised her hand, showing the spiral mark, not as a brand of shame, but as a symbol of survival. "I am both," she said clearly, in perfect Velani and standard. "And I choose peace." The Sky Choir began to sing, not a weaponized frequency, but a lullaby Lyria had once sung to Joran in the medbay, long ago. A song of home, of belonging. One by one, the crowd quieted. Humans and Velani, side by side, lowered their weapons. Even the sleeper agents, their programming disrupted not by force but by empathy, stood still, confused, then calm. The war didn't end that day, but the fear did. In the years that followed, the spiral mark became a symbol not of the Keth-4, but of unity. Children born with it were celebrated, not feared. And Joran and Lyria, older, wiser, still stubborn, raised their family not in a palace, but in a modest home on the edge of the Viridian Gardens, where the scent of earth roses mingled with Velani moonblossoms. Their children grew into leaders of a new age. Sayla as a diplomat, Rian as a scientist working to heal genetic scars of war, Tael as a teacher who taught human and Velani children the same stories his father once told of rain and bread and home. And sometimes, on quiet nights, Joran would sit with Lyria beneath the stars, her blue hair silvering at the temples, his own scars aching with old memories. "Still think I'm stubborn?" he'd ask. She'd smile, leaning into him. "More than ever. But that's why I cried when I thought you were gone. The galaxy needs your kind of stubborn." And far below, in the heart of a peaceful world, their children laughed. Human, Velani, and something beautifully in between. Proof that even in the harshest deserts, life could bloom. Years melted like desert glass under twin suns, and the scars of war softened into stories told at bedtime. Joran's hair grayed, his steps slowed, But his laugh, still rough, still warm, filled the courtyard where their grandchildren played. Lyria's skin, once deep cobalt in fury or indigo in sorrow, now shimmered with the quiet silver blue of contentment. Their children had built lives across stars once divided. Sayla brokered treaties on ice moons, Rian cured genetic plagues in orbital labs, and Tail opened schools where human poetry danced with Velani song. The spiral mark, once feared, became a badge of honor, worn proudly by thousands born of blended blood. The Kethvor faded into myth, their madness undone not by weapons, but by the stubborn, ordinary act of raising kind children. Even old enemies sent gifts on the twins' birthdays: Terran chocolate, Velani sky crystals, hand-stitched quilts from frontier worlds. One evening, as sand swirled gently beyond the garden walls, Lyria leaned against Joran on their favorite bench. "Do you ever miss Earth?" she asked softly. He watched a granddaughter with his nose and Lyria's eyes chase a luminous firefly. "Not really," he said. "Home isn't a planet. It's this." She squeezed his hand, her touch still cool, still sure. They sat in silence as stars blinked awake, countless and kind. Their story wasn't in grand battles or royal decrees, but in shared bread, mended clothes, lullabies sung in 2 languages at once. In the way their son taught Velani elders to bake apple pie, and their daughters argued philosophy over spiced tea. Peace wasn't perfect. Storms still came. But now they weathered them together, human, Velani, and everything in between. And when Joran finally closed his eyes for the last time, decades later, Lyria was there, just as she'd been on that blood-soaked battlefield. This time she didn't cry. She smiled, pressed her forehead to his, and whispered the first words she'd ever said to him in Standard. "You came back." He did, again and again. And in their children's children, he would keep coming back, forever woven into the quiet, beautiful fabric of a world that chose love over war.